The Galactic Coalition was on the verge of collapse. Formed centuries ago to counterbalance the Zenari Dominion's aggressive expansion, the Coalition was an alliance of diverse species, each contributing unique strengths and weaknesses, but relentless warfare had taken its toll. Once thriving planets now lay in ruins, their skies choked with smoke from endless battles. Coalition fleets, once mighty symbols of unity, were now battered remnants, barely able to mount a coordinated defense. The war had drained not just resources, but the will to fight. In the heart of the Coalition's capital on the planet Eris, the High Council convened for what could be its final meeting. Representatives from the member species filled the Grand Hall, their faces etched with exhaustion and despair. Some clutched datapads filled with casualty reports, others whispered hurriedly among themselves, their voices laced with desperation. At the center of the chamber stood High Counselor Terrace, a towering figure of the Urali species. His skin, a deep cerulean hue, shimmered under the room's artificial lights. He had seen too many battles, too many losses. His deep-set eyes, usually calm and calculating, now reflected the burdens of leadership. As he raised his hand, the murmurs ceased, and silence enveloped the hall. "Esteemed members of the council," Terrace began, his voice heavy with the weight of the moment. "We stand at a crossroads. Our defenses are crumbling, and the Zenari advance is relentless. We have exhausted every strategy, every last resource, and yet the enemy marches forward." A hushed murmur spread through the room, the tension palpable. Many of the species present had already lost homeworlds, their people scattered among refugee colonies. The thought of further loss was unbearable. "Our fleets are in shambles," Terrace continued, his voice growing firmer. "Our armies are weary, and so we must consider an option we have long ignored." He paused, taking a deep breath before speaking the words that would send shockwaves through the chamber. "We must seek the aid of humanity." A wave of murmurs erupted, some of outrage, others of disbelief. The humans were a relatively young spacefaring race, known for their advancements, but also for their isolationist stance. Many within the Coalition viewed them as naive and unwilling to take risks beyond their own star system. Counselor Dravos, a reptilian carrion with piercing yellow eyes, hissed his disapproval. "Humans? They are untested, inexperienced. What can they possibly offer that we, with all our centuries of warfare, cannot?" His voice slithered through the hall like a blade. Another voice, from the Avenari delegation, a species of avian-like beings, chimed in with concern. "They have never fought a war of this scale. Even if they agree to join us, can they truly match the ferocity of the Zenari?" Terrace raised a hand to silence the dissent. "I understand your concerns, but hear me out. Humans possess something we have long since lost: fresh perspective, innovation under pressure. They are adaptable beyond measure, and their technological advancements have surged in recent decades. Despite their youth among the stars, they have achieved feats that took our civilization's millennia. Their strategic minds, unburdened by our histories of conflict, may be the key to turning the tide." The chamber fell silent. Many still looked uncertain, but the seed of the idea had been planted. Terrace pressed on, his voice carrying the urgency of their predicament. "We must persuade them. We must show them that this war will not stay at our borders forever. If the Zenari are not stopped, they will reach Earth, and when they do, humanity will have no choice but to fight. Better for them to join us now, while they can prepare, than to face annihilation alone." There was no immediate agreement, but there was no outright refusal either, and in times of desperation, even the most reluctant allies could find common ground. With no other choice, the Council agreed. A delegation would be sent to Earth, and for the first time, the fate of the Coalition would rest in the hands of a species that had yet to prove itself among the stars. The arrival of the alien envoys on Earth was unlike anything seen before. The media frenzy was immediate and relentless, as networks broadcast the first images of the Coalition delegation setting foot on human soil. The public marveled at their varied appearances: towering reptilians, elegant avian-like beings, and the luminous-skinned Urals. It was both an awe-inspiring and terrifying moment. For many, it was the first direct encounter with extraterrestrial life. Security was tight, as the Coalition representatives were transported to the United Nations headquarters in New York City. The world's leaders, still grappling with the implications of the war unfolding beyond their system, gathered in hushed tension. Secretary General Maria Gonzalez stood at the podium, her sharp eyes scanning the assembly before turning toward the coalition representatives. She had spent years navigating the complexities of human diplomacy, but this was a challenge unlike any she had faced before. High Counselor Terrace stepped forward, his presence commanding yet calm. His deep voice resonated through the chamber. "We come not as conquerors, but as allies in desperate need. The Zenari Dominion has already consumed countless worlds, leaving nothing but ashes in their wake. We seek your aid, not just for the survival of the coalition, but for your own future." A hush fell over the room as holographic projections filled the chamber, displaying harrowing images of devastated planets, scorched battlefields, and billions of displaced refugees. Gasps of horror rippled through the assembly. After a long silence, Secretary General Gonzalez finally spoke, her voice measured but tinged with unease. "Your plea is compelling, High Counselor, but humanity has always been hesitant to involve itself in conflicts beyond our borders. Why should we risk our lives and resources for a war that is not ours?" Terrace met her gaze with steady resolve, because if the Zenari are not stopped, your world will be next. They do not negotiate. They do not spare. They consume. This war will find you whether you seek it or not. A tense debate followed. Some of Earth's leaders remained unconvinced, citing the risks and the unknown costs of engaging in an intergalactic war. Others saw the writing on the wall. If the coalition fell, Earth would soon stand alone against an unstoppable force. As discussions stretched late into the night, military strategists, scientists, and world leaders weighed the implications. Humanity's technological advancements had reached remarkable levels, but were they truly prepared to stand against an enemy that had dominated the stars for centuries? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a decision was made. The announcement reverberated across the planet. Humanity would join the war. Across Earth, reactions varied. Some cheered, seeing this as humanity's moment to step onto the galactic stage. Others feared the consequences, questioning whether their species was ready for the horrors of interstellar warfare. Preparations began immediately. Earth's spaceports bustled with activity as engineers and scientists worked tirelessly to modify ships for combat. Soldiers underwent rigorous training, adapting to coalition tactics and weaponry. The world held its breath, knowing that the moment had come for humanity to prove itself in the most consequential battle of its existence. Standing at the helm of this unprecedented effort was Admiral Marcus Steel, a decorated military leader known for his strategic brilliance. Addressing his fleet for the first time, his voice rang with conviction. "We stand on the brink of a new era. This war will not only determine the fate of the coalition, but also define humanity's place among the stars. We will fight with honor, courage, and determination." The course of galactic history had just shifted. Humanity was ready for war. Humanity's first battle in the war against the Zenari was upon them. The newly forged alliance had little time to prepare before they were thrust into the heart of the conflict. The coalition's fleet, battered and weary, assembled at the edge of the Sora system, waiting for humanity's arrival. The mood was grim. Many coalition soldiers had seen too many defeats, too many comrades lost. Hope was a scarce commodity. When the first human warships emerged from hyperspace, their sleek and formidable designs gliding into formation, a sense of renewed possibility stirred through the ranks. Admiral Marcus Steel, standing on the bridge of the flagship Aegis, surveyed the war-torn fleet ahead. His jaw clenched as he took in the sight. Ships barely held together by emergency repairs, weary crew members moving with mechanical efficiency, their eyes hollow with loss. A transmission crackled through the comms. "Admiral Steel, welcome to the Sora system. I hope your confidence is well-founded," came the gravelly voice of Admiral Cathar, a battle-hardened strategist from the Drari species. Steele's gaze remained fixed on the enemy's signatures, lighting up the tactical screen. "We understand the gravity of the situation, Admiral. We are ready, and we do not intend to lose." The decision had been made. Humanity had pledged its forces to the coalition, and the time for their first true test had arrived. Their target was Zeria, a heavily fortified Zenari supply hub deep within enemy territory. Intelligence reports suggested a substantial Zenari presence, with a network of orbital defenses and formidable capital ships stationed to defend it. As the fleet approached Zeria, Admiral Marcus Steel stood on the bridge of the Aegis, surveying the battle-ready ships surrounding him. His expression was grim but resolute. "This is our chance to prove we belong in this fight," he said, his voice steady. "We strike hard, we strike fast, and we show the Zenari what humanity is capable of." The human forces were assigned the crucial role of spearheading the attack, using their advanced weaponry and tactical precision to break the enemy's initial defenses. Fighter squadrons, led by Captain Rebecca Hayes, launched ahead, weaving through enemy fire with unmatched agility. Meanwhile, coalition forces prepared for the ground assault, led by Captain Sarah Connor's elite infiltration unit, tasked with disabling the planetary defense grid from within. With the successful assault on Zeria, the coalition had proven that humanity's inclusion in the war effort was more than a gamble. It was a turning point. Yet, the Zenari Dominion was far from broken. Their pride and power had suffered a significant blow, but they would not fall without an overwhelming show of force. Intelligence reports had pinpointed the next key target, the Wrath of Kor, the Dominion's most feared warship and a mobile command fortress that had crushed entire fleets in battle. Admiral Marcus Steel stood in the war room aboard the Aegis, studying the holographic projections of the Zenari fleet's movements. The Wrath of Kor was more than a symbol, it was the Dominion's hammer, and its destruction would send shockwaves across the galaxy. His officers stood around him, their faces tense with anticipation. "This ship is unlike anything we have faced before," Steel said, his voice calm but weighted with the gravity of their mission. "Its weaponry can tear through an entire battalion of ships, and its defenses are virtually impenetrable, but nothing is invincible." Captain Rebecca Hayes crossed her arms, eyes locked on the display. "Then we hit it where it hurts," she said. "Find a weak spot, disrupt their formation, and make sure they never see it coming." Steel nodded. "Agreed. The coalition fleet will serve as our distraction, engaging the enemy forces while we slip past their perimeter. Our team will disable the ship's shield generator, creating an opening for a precision strike. Commander Tariq Aziz, I need you and your engineers ready to infiltrate their defenses the moment we breach their outer hull." Aziz gave a confident nod. "We'll get the job done, Admiral. Just get us in close enough." The tension in the war room was palpable. The mission was high risk, but the alternative was allowing the Wrath of Kor to remain unchecked, a force capable of undoing everything they had fought for. When the fleet emerged from hyperspace, the battlefield ahead was a maelstrom of fire and destruction. The Zenari fleet had anticipated their arrival, and the Wrath of Kor loomed in the distance, a colossus of black steel and pulsing energy shields, its presence alone casting an oppressive weight over the battlefield. "All ships engage at will," Steel commanded. The battle erupted in an instant, energy cannons streaking across the void as Coalition and Zenari forces clashed in a chaotic dance of destruction. The Aegis led the charge, its advanced human-engineered weaponry tearing through enemy lines. Hayes and her fighter squadrons weaved through the chaos, providing cover as the infiltration team, led by Aziz, deployed towards the Wrath of Kor in a heavily shielded transport ship. Inside the transport, Aziz's team checked their gear, their expressions ranging from grim determination to nervous resolve. He placed a reassuring hand on the shoulder of one of his engineers, a young woman named Luton Vega. "We trained for this," he said. "Stick to the plan, and we'll get through it." Vega nodded, exhaling sharply as the ship rocked from nearby explosions. "No pressure, right?" The transport latched onto the outer hull of the Wrath of Kor, magnetic clamps securing its position. The team moved quickly, cutting into the hull with precision drills. As soon as the opening was made, they were met with immediate resistance, Zenari soldiers, their towering armored forms ready for battle. Aziz drew his pulse rifle and led the charge. "Go! Secure the generator room." Blaster fire erupted in the tight corridors of the warship. The humans fought with ferocity, using their smaller frames to outmaneuver the heavily armored Zenari. The battle was brutal, but step by step they pushed forward. Meanwhile, aboard the Aegis, Steel watched as the team's vitals flickered on his command console. "They're in," he said. "Now we hold the line." Hayes' squadrons tightened their formation, intercepting Zenari reinforcements that moved to reinforce the warship. Every second counted. Inside the Wrath of Kor, Aziz and his team reached the generator room. The enormous device pulsed with energy, its protective casing reinforced beyond standard designs. "This is going to take some time," Vega muttered, already setting up the explosives to overload the system. The Zenari did not make it easy. More soldiers swarmed in, the fighting growing more desperate. Aziz took cover behind a console, returning fire. "Work fast, Vega!" "I'm trying," she shouted back. Her fingers danced over the detonator's control panel, sweat forming on her brow. The ship rumbled violently as coalition forces intensified their bombardment outside. Then, with a final click, she activated the sequence. "Detonation in 30 seconds. Move, move, move." The team sprinted back toward their transport, fighting through the last wave of Zenari opposition. As soon as they were clear, Vega detonated the charges. The entire warship trembled as a series of explosions erupted from within, the shields flickering and finally collapsing. "This is it," Steel said. "All ships, concentrate fire on the Wrath of Kor." Every available coalition vessel unleashed their full power on the vulnerable warship. Missiles, plasma rounds, and focused energy beams struck in unison. The Wrath of Kor groaned under the assault, its hull fracturing, internal fires consuming entire decks. A final, massive explosion ruptured through the center of the warship. The Wrath of Kor had fallen. The battlefield fell into silence. The Zenari forces, witnessing the destruction of their most powerful weapon, faltered. The coalition forces let out a collective cheer, their disbelief giving way to triumph. Aziz's transport docked safely back on the Aegis. As he stepped onto the deck, still catching his breath, Steel met him with a firm handshake. "You did it, Commander." Aziz managed a tired grin. "Wouldn't have minded a little less excitement, sir." Steel chuckled, but his gaze returned to the view screen. The war was far from over, but tonight they had taken the first real step toward victory. The fall of the Wrath of Kor sent shockwaves throughout the Dominion. For the first time in centuries, the Zenari were afraid, and the coalition was ready to press the advantage. The destruction of the Wrath of Kor had sent shockwaves through the Zenari Dominion. Their greatest weapon was gone, and for the first time, their grip on the galaxy had begun to loosen. But the war was far from over. The coalition, emboldened by their victories, knew that to break the Dominion once and for all, they would have to strike at its heart, the planet Zenthia, the Zenari homeworld, and the center of their military operations. Admiral Marcus Steel stood at the bridge of the Aegis, staring at the holographic display of Zenthia's planetary defenses. "This is it," he said, his voice carrying the weight of the moment. "We take Zenthia, and the war ends." Captain Rebecca Hayes leaned against the console, her expression steely. "It won't be easy. Their forces are still strong, and they'll defend their home with everything they have." Commander Tariq Aziz, standing nearby, nodded. "We've come this far. We need to give them no chance to regroup. Hit them hard, fast, and make sure they don't get back up." Steel turned to his officers, his gaze sweeping over the faces of those who had fought by his side for months. "We will launch a full-scale assault, space, air, and ground. Our fleets will engage their armada in orbit, while our ground forces deploy to the surface. We'll need to take out their planetary defense grid before we can send in the bulk of our troops." The coalition fleet gathered at the edge of the system, a massive armada of ships from every species that had banded together against the Dominion. The anticipation was thick, tension hanging in the air like an electric charge before a storm. For many, this was more than a battle. It was a fight for survival, for vengeance, for a future without fear. Steel gave the order. "All ships, initiate jump." The fleet emerged from hyperspace above Zenthia, met instantly by a wall of enemy fire. The Zenari had been expecting them. The space above the planet became a storm of energy blasts, missiles, and streaking fighters. The coalition ships responded in kind, their weapons cutting through the void as the battle erupted in full force. On the surface, Captain Sarah Connor and her elite ground team deployed in drop pods, their descent through the planet's atmosphere turbulent as anti-aircraft fire attempted to pick them off. Inside her pod, Connor tightened her grip on her harness, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Brace for impact," she shouted as their pods slammed into the ground. The doors blasted open, and the team poured out, weapons raised. The Zenari were already there, waiting. Gunfire erupted as the two forces clashed in the war-torn streets of Zenthia's capital. Connor led her squad forward, ducking behind debris as enemy fire rained down around them. "We need to get to the control station and disable that defense grid," she yelled over the chaos. Sergeant Alex Petro fired his heavy blaster, mowing down a squad of advancing Zenari. "We've got to move fast. Reinforcements are on their way." Back in orbit, the battle raged on. The Aegis took a direct hit, alarms blaring as damage reports flooded in. "Shields at 40%, an officer called out. Steel gritted his teeth. "Hold formation. Keep firing." Despite the damage, the coalition was gaining ground. The Zenari forces were strong, but they were no longer invincible. Humanity's strategies, coupled with the experience of the coalition veterans, had turned the tide. On the ground, Connor's team breached the control station, engaging in brutal close-quarters combat as they fought their way to the main control room. Blood and sweat coated her hands as she slammed a Zenari soldier against the wall, using her combat knife to finish the job. "Morales, get that grid down," she barked at her technician. Javier Morales frantically worked at the control panel, his fingers moving with practiced speed. Almost there, just a few more seconds. The Zenari stormed in for a last desperate counterattack. Connor's team held their ground, firing shot after shot, their bodies aching from exhaustion but refusing to fall back. Finally, the screen flashed green. Morales grinned despite the sweat dripping down his face. "Defense grid is down." Above on the Aegis, Steel saw the planetary defenses flicker and die. His jaw clenched as he seized the opportunity. "All units, full offensive, take the planet." Dropships poured from the coalition fleet, landing troops across the surface as the Zenari lines broke. The city burned, explosions shaking the ground as the battle reached its peak. At the center of the city, the Zenari High Command made their final stand. Steel himself led an assault team to the main command bunker, his rifle raised as they breached the doors. Inside, the Zenari leaders, once so confident in their rule, looked at him with fear. One of them snarled, his claws flexing. "You think you've won?" Steele's expression was cold. "I know we have." With that, the coalition forces stormed the bunker. The last resistance crumbled, and with it, the Dominion fell. The war was over. The coalition troops let out a cheer, exhaustion and relief washing over them. Some fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the weight of what they had achieved. The galaxy had been freed from the tyranny of the Zenari. Steel stood on a rooftop, overlooking the ruins of what was once the heart of the Dominion. He exhaled slowly, the adrenaline finally starting to fade. "It's over," he murmured. Connor joined him, wiping blood from her brow. "For now," she said, "but we'll need to rebuild." Steel nodded, "And we will, together." Across the galaxy, the news spread. The Zenari Dominion had fallen, and a new era had begun, one forged by the unity and determination of species that had once been divided. Humanity had not only proven itself in the war, it had helped shape the future of the galaxy. The war was over, but the true battle had just begun. The galaxy had been freed from the tyranny of the Zenari Dominion, yet what lay ahead was uncharted territory. The coalition had fought together, bled together, and emerged victorious, but now they had to rebuild what had been lost. Admiral Marcus Steel stood on the bridge of the Aegis, his gaze locked on the holographic projection of Zenthia. Fires still burned in the ruined city below, but for the first time in generations, the planet was free. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him like never before. Winning a war was one thing, winning the peace was another. Captain Rebecca Hayes joined him, her uniform still streaked with soot and blood. She let out a long breath. "So what happens now?" Steel folded his arms, watching as supply ships descended through the atmosphere, bringing much-needed aid to the shattered world. "Now, we build. We make sure this was more than just a war for survival. We turn this into something better, something worth the cost." Across the planet, coalition soldiers worked alongside Zenari civilians, distributing food, medical supplies, and repairing infrastructure. What had once been an occupied world of fear was now filled with cautious hope. Some Zenari looked upon their former enemies with resentment, others with gratitude. The scars of war ran deep, and healing would take time. Sarah Connor, now tasked with leading peacekeeping operations on the surface, stood at the foot of the former Zenari High Command bunker, now converted into a temporary headquarters for the Coalition. She observed the remnants of the Zenari forces who had surrendered. Some had accepted their fate, while others glared with smoldering defiance. One former Zenari general, a towering figure with battle-worn armor, stepped forward. His deep-set eyes locked onto Connor's. "You have won the battle, but do you truly believe you can change what we are?" Connor met his gaze without flinching. "Change doesn't happen overnight, but we're not here to erase your people. We're here to build a future where no one has to live under tyranny again. That includes you." The general studied her, then let out a slow breath. "We will see." Back in orbit, discussions had already begun among the Coalition leaders. The question on everyone's mind, what now? Some argued for the complete dismantling of the Zenari infrastructure, while others pushed for integration, knowing that peace forged in destruction was peace doomed to fail. Secretary General Taurus of the Urali species addressed the gathered representatives. "We stand on the edge of history. What we do next will determine whether this was simply a victory or the beginning of something greater. We must not repeat the mistakes of the past." Steel listened carefully, knowing that the fight for stability would be just as perilous as the battles they had fought. He took a deep breath, then stepped forward. "We did not win this war just to fall into another cycle of oppression and revenge. We have a chance to reshape the galaxy together." The room fell silent as the weight of his words settled over them. Then, slowly, the leaders of the Coalition began to nod. Reconstruction efforts spread beyond Zenthia. Freed planets across the galaxy called for representation, and for the first time, former enemies sat at the same table, discussing not war, but the future. It was fragile, uncertain, but undeniably real. Weeks later, as the Coalition solidified into a new governing body, a ceremony was held on Zeria, a liberated world that now served as a symbol of unity. Soldiers, diplomats, and civilians from all species gathered to commemorate the end of the war and the beginning of the future. As the banners of the Coalition were raised, Admiral Steel, Captain Hayes, and Captain Connor stood together, watching history unfold before them. Hayes smirked. "You think we actually pulled this off?" Steel chuckled, shaking his head. "We pulled off the impossible more times than I can count. Why stop now?" Connor folded her arms, her expression serious but hopeful. "Because this time, the real work begins." And so, under the twin suns of Zeria, the first steps toward a new era were taken. The war had been won, but the future was theirs to shape. The galaxy would never be the same again. If you enjoy this video, please leave a like, share, and subscribe for more sci-fi stories. Here is another video I know you will enjoy.